understanding of the world. Thus, storytelling is also something that I do with my music, whether the work is designed to stand on its own or accompany other forms of art. For my senior capstone in music, I found it only appropriate that I should make it a focus in my work. As an avid lover of the classics and all things Greek, when I sought stories to tell, I turned to mythology. Many of these stories have been done and redone countless times, like that of Orpheus, Odysseus, Hercules, Hector, Helen, Paris, and the list goes on. Instead of these more popular figures, I sought that of a woman who has been mistreated and villainized, there are quite a few, and whose story hasn't been often told with compassion. I wanted a strong female protagonist that challenges what we think we know about women in myth and how women have been portrayed throughout history. I settled on one of the most iconic yet overlooked figures in this tradition, Medusa. Most people know the basics. Medusa was a monstrous woman with snakes for hair and who could turn people to stone with a single glance. Some know that she was made ugly by the goddess Athena, that she was the mother of Pegasus and Chrysaor, and that she was killed by Perseus, demigod son of Zeus. He used her severed head to petrify a sea monster before it could devour Princess Andromeda, and ever since the head was fixed to Athena's shield, the Aegis. Medusa was one of 3 sisters known as the Gorgons, but she was the only one who was mortal. Generally, people leave it at that, but it's a little more complicated. What she represents has been widely debated and varyingly interpreted throughout the centuries, from the image of horror to one of protection to the embodiment of the female eros. She has been horrifyingly ugly, and she has also been strikingly beautiful. In the most general terms, Medusa toes the line between monster and mortal more effectively than perhaps any other figure in the Greek mythos. Every ancient myth has more than one version, and they generally evolve through time and take on new meanings. Ovid's retelling is the one that most closely resembles my own, in which Medusa, an innocent beauty, is seduced and lured away by the sea god Poseidon, and then raped at Athena's temple, leading to an enraged Athena transforming her into a monster. But what does this monstrosity actually mean? And how do we define the nature of her narrative and how it interacts with society as a whole? Gorgons have been cited as having various forms throughout mythology, from the human-like version we're most familiar with to a version having scaly heads, boar's tusks, wings, and serpents wrapped around their waists as belts. Part of what makes the Gorgons so fascinating is that in literature, they are described as horrifyingly ugly, but in classical art, they are often beautiful. There are some general trends in what they look like at which period of time, yet some of the varying versions of the Gorgon's appearance emerged concurrently. Some were more human, some less so, indicating that even then their image was disputed. Similarly unclear is exactly when it was decided that Medusa's hair was made of snakes. Some art shows her with only snakes around her waist, others in addition to regular hair. The vision of Medusa as a tragic beauty with snakes for hair didn't actually exist until around the time of Ovid's Metamorphoses, when Romans took a more sympathetic view of the character. There is evidence that serpent-haired women represented divine power and wisdom. For example, Medusa's image famously appears on the exterior of the Temple of Artemis at Corfu as a protection against evil. However, sometimes her violation was justified in the male mindset by viewing her as a wild object to be tamed. In the Middle Ages, around the reemergence of the ugly Gorgon image, Medusa was the embodiment of men's greatest fear, sensual and powerful women. The part of the myth concerning the how and why of Medusa's transformation is problematic. The ancients, as well as many contemporary audiences, see it as Athena punishing Medusa for what happened. We blame the victim. She becomes a villain, and Poseidon gets by unscathed. It is a pattern all too familiar to women around the world, but in the spirit of justice for sexual assault, which in recent years has finally been coming more to the forefront, consider this. It has also been said that this transformation was not punishment but protection. No man could ever meet eyes with Medusa again without being turned to stone. Athena, both as a warrior and as a woman, saw Medusa's pain and vulnerability and gave her power to ensure she would never be hurt or violated again. That is the version of the story I'm telling today. It is a matter of viewing the myth through the female versus the male gaze. Women are, to quote Susan Bowers, learning to see clearly for themselves, thus reconstructing traditional male images of women. If Athena really wanted to punish Medusa as the villain of the story, she likely would not have given her an ability that made her so strong. However, it's convenient to view it this way, both because it's what we have been told, and also because male-dominated society in antiquity and beyond could not admit submission to the victim of their violence. To put it briefly, men have objectified Medusa to defend against her own power, to quite literally objectify them. They saw that she was strong and had to weaken her immediately. The idea of Medusa's beauty is a loaded issue. In the Greek world, physical and moral beauty were considered linked and shared the same adjective, kalos. The circumstance of a beautiful Gorgon also complicates the role of Perseus, her killer, as a hero, though it is what he is considered to be. If she is considered to have beauty or kalotes, her murder is a stain on his honor that I am not inclined to forget, and in fact would like to emphasize. Granted, there are many questionable moments for epic heroes and their morals, largely due to vastly different moral code at the time that made allowance for violence under certain circumstances. In this instance, nevertheless, even folks in antiquity apparently had doubts about Perseus' actions. It creates a dissonance in the narrative. Some women artists today tackle the myth as a woman confronting and acknowledging the darkness within her. I agree that this is an important component of the story. While Medusa loses her innocence and purity and altogether loses the old version of herself, Athena's gift allows her to access a dark power of which some variant exists in every woman. She is no longer the ideal that society demands, but she has attained a formidable individuality. She exists for no one but herself anymore. Yes, her fate is a tragedy, but there is a resilience that we can find within it. My ultimate goal with this work, once it reaches its final form, is to convey the full complexity of Medusa's story so that I and the audience can, in the wake of trauma and tragedy, access that resilience ourselves. This work was contrived as the first act of a ballet, so if it were staged, there would be sets, costumes, and most importantly, dancers. In the future, I plan to finish the work, and in an ideal world, it will be choreographed and performed. The version that I am presenting today includes 8 complete numbers following the action of the story. Each instrument roughly corresponds to a character or characters, as well as contributing to ideas, settings, and moods. The guitar represents Medusa. I wanted to sound similar to a lyre in order to evoke the spirit of Greek mythology. And I thought about using a harp, but settled on a guitar both because of a video I saw of a ballerina dancing to solo classical guitar, and because culturally, a guitar often fulfills the same function now as a lyre did then, as a standard accompaniment to spontaneous storytelling through song. The bassoon with its watery timbre represents Poseidon. I chose the flute to represent Athena, both because it can produce a sound that is simultaneously feminine and strong and is evocative of Greek music. And according to Greek myth, Athena herself invented the flute, so it is extra appropriate. Violins, which represent Medusa's sisters, Stheno and Euryale, complement the other instruments and can achieve a variety of timbres that was important for my compositional intentions. Given the nature of this work, I preferred the sound of twin violins over a violin viola, though I considered it. It also reflects the general trend in art that Medusa's sisters are more or less identical, while Medusa herself stands out from the crowd. The piano and percussion are not representative of a character per se, but rather set the tone and support the characters in action, much like the function of a traditional Greek chorus. My compositional style errs on the side of quasi-minimalism with elements of romanticism and neoclassicism. Most of my favorite composers are from the Romantic era, such as Chopin and Tchaikovsky, but I also find myself inspired by minimalists Steve Reich, Terry Riley, and Philip Glass, as well as the freedom and emotion found in pieces such as Bach's unaccompanied cello suites. When I think of ballet, I think of the works of Tchaikovsky and how they're memorable because of their evocative melodies. At the same time, I wanted to embrace texture in a minimalistic way that sparks contemplation of the mood of a given scene. So in designing this composition, I attempted to strike a balance of both. Since the subject matter is a Greek myth, I wanted to make a point to include Greek musical influences. It is something I have explored in my previous studies in Vienna and have learned much about the overall Greek influence on Western music in my music history courses at Kenyon. Some of this was achieved through instrumentation, such as the flute, drums, cowbell, and lyre-like quality of the guitar, and I also used meter, melody, and at times texture. I overcame many challenges while composing and coordinating this performance. I began my research early in the summer, learning about the history of ballet and delving into Medusa's story. Trying to tackle it in addition to my classwork and health concerns was tumultuous, but in the end it taught me a lot about my own fortitude and resolve. It is also the longest cohesive work I have ever written, and while I have written in dance forms before, I didn't have to consciously think about them actually being performed by dancers with a narrative structure. Such a task requires a balance of artistic vision and predictability in order to be workable for a dancer and choreographer. As I said before, I plan to eventually write the second act of this work, as well as fill in transitional material so that it can be choreographed and performed as a full ballet. The second act will pick up back on the island, where Medusa, back with her sisters, adjusts herself to this new form and becomes notorious throughout Greece. The demigod Perseus is among those who hears of her destructive power and embarks on a quest to cut off her head and deliver it as a gift. Atypically, the hero Perseus will be portrayed as a villain, and in a tragic ending, he succeeds in killing her, but a spark of hope occurs when her children, Pegasus and Chrysaor, sprout from her neck and dance in her memory. Athena fixes the image of her head to her shield, and her spirit is honored forever. To return to my point of why I chose this story, I feel a sense of responsibility as a composer who is also a woman to use my art to empower and break the silence of other women who have been overlooked, erased, and forgotten throughout history. I think of how someone could be told that she would never learn to read ancient Greek because she was a woman, or how the moment a woman composed and performed in public, it could be considered a scandal. There are still very few female film composers, which is my desired career path, and few women who are given equal opportunity in the film industry as a whole. Society has been dampening our abilities for millennia, and enough is enough. Living in the 21st century, I am extraordinarily lucky, but the battle is not over. Emerging into the fields of classics and music composition, which have been traditionally dominated by men since their invention, I and others in my position are seeking to reframe the narrative that we have been told. Concerning mythological figures, in the words of Susan R. Bowers, the task for feminist scholars is to expose the depth and profundity of these images in the Western psyche, and discover how to reconstruct images of women that represent their complexity and power. By reclaiming the Medusa narrative and by exploring what she truly represents for us, we may continue the trend of changing how we allow stories to shape our society, and thus we can change how our own story proceeds. Thank you very much, and now please allow me to present Medusa.